you all so much for being here today. I am so excited about this week. I can't even express it. I really can't. I am jazzed just by seeing you, because every time any one of you walk into the energy, even when we were virtual, you had energy in the chat that was like no other thing I'd ever seen. But when you are in person, there is something that just cannot be beat. So thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us today. You know, you guys know this, but our folks who may be meeting us for the first time, at Ed Trust, we fiercely advocate for equity in education and are committed to ensuring students of color and students from low-income communities have access to the brightest futures possible. And that bold and unapologetic advocacy is necessary to ensure that all students receive an excellent education in learning environments where they are seen, nurtured, and supported. It goes without saying that we, as education advocates, remain laser focused on pushing back on censorship, whether it's book bans, the teaching of anti-honest history, or anti-DEI efforts. So we must continue to speak out and speak up for what's right. Continue to urge and support advocates across the country to join us and to stay on the case. We have an absolutely fantastic panels this evening, to discuss these issues and advocacy strategies that have proven effective. I'm excited to be with you here to hear this discussion. Again, thank you for joining us today. And with that, I will hand it over to the amazing Amisha Cross.
Denise was too quick. I was trying to get there.
You have. So
we appreciate that.
And thank you so much, Denise, and for everyone here live in the room with us, as well as those who are joining us virtually. So for a show of hands around this room and online, who's a fan of Reading Rainbow or Wishbone? As a kid, I grew up on both of those. There is no secret to the power that lies in books. They can change lives. They open the eyes of the reader to the world of the unknown. They help them to understand the most difficult concepts, explore various cultures, grapple with the world around them, the good things, the bad things, the history we like, and the history that may make some people uncomfortable. The dark history that shakes us to our core can only be driven to change if you know what happened and ways you can move forward to solve those problems. That's one of the reasons why we're here today, to inform advocates, but also to get the drumbeat going, to ways in which we can change the things that are affecting daily lives of teachers, of librarians, and most importantly, the students and young people that we serve. Regardless of what some of you have heard, slavery was not a skills development program.
Say that one more time.
It was not apprenticeship. The Civil War wasn't the war of northern aggression. And it wasn't a war based on the preservation of states' rights. Any more than the erasure of valuable historical understanding of Blacks, Latinos, LGBTQ+, or other underserved populations is a positive for our democracy. What we have to do is fight autocratic motives, because we don't ban books in democracies. We don't eliminate learning in democracies. We don't limit what children can see, what they can hear, the knowledge of the past that matters to them and helps them to understand their world and the culture of which they represent, as well as the cultures around them. That's what autocratic regimes do. That's what dictators do. That is not what this nation was founded on. Unfortunately, more than 4,200 books were targeted for censorship in 2023 alone. That's a 65% increase from 2022, according to the American Library Association. The overwhelming majority of those books targeted LGBTQ+ identities, as well as Black history. And make no mistake, this is by design. There are groups in this country that are being targeted. And parents' rights activists, the anti-CRT groups, in addition to those who don't want us to talk about things like Reconstruction, redlining, slavery, and the inherent evils that it had, are all hard at work across states, not only in the deep red South, but also in the North, across the Midwest. This effort is no longer one that can be considered partisan, because we're seeing these bills pop up in places that are in some instances we would consider unlikely. We're talking bills across 44 states and counting. There are only 50, y'all. Regardless of where you live, this should be an issue that matters to you. Whether you have kids or not, this should be an issue that matters to you. Because democracy should be an issue that matters to you. And regardless of what the anti-DEI, anti-CRT, anti-woke, anti-black, anti-LGBT, anti-all things that aren't the origination of white America, regardless of what they have to say, it is our imperative to remind them that our history, our culture, who we are and what we stand for can't be erased.
Can't be erased.
We are so very glad that each and every one of you took the time to join us today and spend some time to learn about our Can't Be Erased campaign. And I hope that all of you will visit edtrust.org/takeaction, where you will find a lot of information, talking points, federal legislation, state-based advocacy, a lot of things that can help you when you go back into your hometowns to actually get involved. Because this is a fight that we should all engage in. This is work worth doing, and we want to make sure that we are all hands on deck, because quite frankly, the opposition has all of theirs in. They are highly funded, they are highly strategic, and they are advancing across multiple states in this country, and we want to make sure that we meet them where they are, and we meet them strongly with the fierce civil rights advocacy that Denise Ford talked about earlier, that we know our panel is going to talk about in a few minutes. And with that, I am going to introduce our esteemed panel of Dr. Tangerine Marshall, Mr. David Johns. So it's a lot of doctors up here. Dr. David Johns. Dr. David Johns and Dr. Heather Harding. Dr. Tangerine Marshall is a nationally recognized and sought-after expert on ed equity and educational leadership. She has more than 2 decades of experience advancing the practice on behalf of students of color, in particular, those who are experiencing economic uncertainty and those perpetually left on the margins of our education system. She partners with states, school districts, schools, and other education organizations to solve some of the most complex issues that we are facing today. So again, please welcome Dr. Tangerine Marshall, who is going to be your moderator. We also have Dr. David Johns. He's the CEO and Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition, NBJC. It's a civil rights organization dedicated to the empowerment of Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus, and same gender identifying loving people, including people with HIV/AIDS. Dr. Johns was the first Executive Director of the White House Initiative on the Educational Excellence for African Americans by President Obama. Kudos there. He was a senior education policy advisor to the Senate Committee on Health. He has been a fellow with the Congressional Black Caucus. He also most recently received the Active Advocate Award at BET's Black and Iconic Celebration in 2024. David Johns stays busy all of the time. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Heather Harding, whose daughter is also here. Heather Harding is the Executive Director of the Campaign for Our Shared Future. She's responsible for the overall health, sustainability, and success of COSIP's work. She is also a former teacher. She is someone who has led in advocacy and believes in collaboration between both parents and teachers. She brings communities into the schools, and she understands the reciprocity therein. We're excited to have all of you, and with that, I'll let Dr. Marshall take it over.
All right, well, let's get started. We're going to have several categories around which to organize our conversation. We'll start out talking about the motivations behind what we've got. So here's our first question. What do you see as the primary motivations behind the recent surge in book bans in schools and libraries across the country?
Great. You want me to kick it off?
Sure.
Because I'm ready. You stay ready.
Set it off.
Okay. So the Campaign for Our Shared Future is really the only organization that's solely focused. We're a time-bound, nonpartisan, I know that's important for some of y'all, organization. And we are here to defend and promote public education from extremist attacks. That's the only reason, that's the only thing we work on. And we were founded in 2021 because, lo and behold, there was a spate of legislation at the state level that was telling people they couldn't use certain words, right? And coming out of Florida and Texas, all of a sudden, folks were no longer free to talk about anti-racism, to talk about being gay, to do anything that seemed to make a certain group of people upset or cry. Okay?
Which group of people, Fran?
Name your groups. Name your groups.
Words matter.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
It matters.
White children,
Thank you.
essentially. White children, right?
Cards on the table, basically.
At least that's how the narrative goes. But what it's funny because I was working in philanthropy at the time and working with groups that were trying to improve classroom instruction. And essentially, they had to stop in their tracks. It was an interruption to work that was bringing in cultural identities and helping make learning more relevant. And at first we thought, gosh, what is going on? Is this about teaching and learning? Guess what, it's not. Because essentially this is a political, strategic political attack on public institutions, and public education is just the one that's up now. Right? And many conservative, extreme right conservative strategists said the quiet part out loud and talked about undermining public trust in public institutions like schools. And very quickly it became something that other politicians who are trying to get notoriety could latch onto. And for those of you who are from this region, you know the story of Virginia and Governor Glenn Youngkin and ways. And essentially the first thing is, it's not hard to create fear campaigns with misinformation. And it's certainly not hard to do that coming out of a global pandemic where there were mass school closures. So making parents angry and undermining their trust and confidence was quite easy coming out of the pandemic. And that's unfortunate for all of us. But for sure, what we also saw was just a spate of copycats and state legislatures, as you all know in this room, who don't have a lot of staff, who don't have a lot of capacity, just passing bills and getting a lot of notoriety in the media. And so we see that this is really just political theater that is happy to use our students and our families as collateral damage.
Thank you. Dr. Johns, can you talk about how the trend that Dr. Harding just talked about, how does it intersect with other broader education debates that are currently on the table?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and it's about intersectionality, and I want to shift it a little bit and just be clear in how I'm going to answer it. Bell Hooks talks about this in Teaching Critical Thinking. Again, I want to cite her because this shit is, for me, not that deep. It's also not new. The short answer to the question of why we're here is white supremacy. And to connect it to what Bell Hooks talks about is that we forget, and we often don't teach by design, students, public school students in particular, that defending democracy is the birthright of every generation.
Right.
And I chose to be both. I chose to accept the calling of my life to be an educator and to pursue being a sociologist, knowing that schools are required for societies to recreate themselves.
That's right.
And so I want to be clear that the contestation that we are talking about now, starting with this conversation around book bans, but to your question also includes the attacks on LGBTQIA+ students, identities and experiences, is again not new. And I say that because all of these attacks are rooted in the anti-blackness that makes this country what it is today.
Right.
Did I answer your question?
It does. No, it does. I think it's really important to be very clear about the root, right? Because we can always talk surface and think about what we're seeing now, but it doesn't come, it's not self-generating, it comes from someplace. And so yes, you did answer the question. But I want to think now, thinking about the consequences, right? So what are the potential consequences? And I'm going to take out the word potential, because there's not potential, there are consequences to the decisions that are being made for kids' lives. So what are the consequences of banning book discussions and limiting those discussions about race, gender, sexual orientation? What's the consequences in the educational landscape and in the learning environment itself?
Yeah, let's start personal. I want to invite in Nigel Shelby into this room. Nigel Shelby would have celebrated his 20th birthday this February. but he died by suicide in Huntsville, Alabama, after being bullied for being black and same-gender loving. In case y'all miss it in the intro, I don't use gay, because it's a white male political identifier. When I say gay, y'all think about shit that doesn't look like this.
Right.
So I use the term same-gender loving to be clear about me being a descendant of Africa, and also unapologetic about how God made me. So when Nigel complained about being bullied, as most of y'all gonna take my time, stop, I appreciate it. As Nigel complained about being bullied and named experiencing suicidal ideation, so to Heather's point, for those who don't track the data, the suicide rates for black youth have doubled in the past 2 decades. And the data that we're all citing was pre-pandemic. And what we know, based on the limited data that exists, is that students who identify as or who are perceived to be queer, I'm gonna come back to that in a second, the suicide rates are astronomical.
Right.
And they're even worse for our students who identify as trans or gender expansive, or people continue to call gender nonconforming, but that reinforces the gender binaries we're trying to get away from. The point I'm trying to make here is that when Nigel said, I need help,
No one helped.
the educators around him said, we won't see you or hear you.
Right.
And in fact, one of his administrators put on music and told him to dance.
Right.
Because that makes us feel good. Our moderator talked about the fact that there, what'd you say, 40-some states where book bans have been
44.
introduced? 44. There's not a single state that you can go to where book bans haven't been introduced, or somebody hasn't introduced a version of Don't Say Gay.
That's right.
Right, exactly.
That's provided you have the luxury of mobility and can actually what? Move. So the consequences are that babies are dying. Children who didn't ask to be born, who don't consent to any of these political games that people like Ronald Deion DeSantis, the failed history teacher turned governor of Florida, play. They're dying.
Right.
They are literally dying, and they're figuratively dying at the same time, on top of what I've named Don't Say Gay, which is a revision of what they tried to say because they lie, and we just need to point out their lies.
That's right.
You have state legislatures who are also cutting off access to life-saving and life-affirming health care.
That's right.
So the consequences of literal death, there's a term for it, it's genocide. In addition to that, we are forcing educators into spaces where they feel hamstrung. For me, the choice is easy. If you don't want to resist in ways that allow you to show up for the babies that don't have a choice, then choose another fucking profession. And it's got us fighting with each other.
Right, yeah, we got to make that
Rather
clear
than
as
being
well.
focused
That's right.
on upending white supremacy.
Yeah.
But I again want to end where I began, which is to say that the consequences that our babies, and Asa Hilliard said this, I have never met a single child, in particular a black child, who is not a genius. There's no secret to how we support them. We first acknowledge them as human, and we support them with love. Too many of our babies are not getting either in spaces that they're forced to occupy. And so my hope is that more of us work woke, to use the term that actually exists and the way that he's tried to bastardize it, to try and upend this so that our babies can actually survive and then have the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, Heather, drop in.
And let me just add that whether you have one of these laws in place at the state or local level, the chilling effect is in full effect.
Real. It's very
and
real.
so educators all over the country are worried about what they know is the best professional judgment to make. They will make the other decision because they're not sure you're going to show up for them as advocates. So I just want to say that. It's really important that we remind them that we're in the majority, because we are, and we have to stop letting them tell lies, and we have to call them on it, and then we have to say, look, do the right thing for our children. We're going to back you up. It's really important right now because of the way people are self-censoring.
Yeah, and when you're talking about putting people's livelihoods on the line, you automatically push them into an either-or bucket of decision-making. And so we definitely want to figure out how to avoid that and get people supported. So if we think about this idea of parents' rights, and we've been talking a lot about who's got the right to advocate for their child as a parent, I want to pivot to, we've heard a lot about parents' rights, right? So how should we be talking about parents' rights in determining educational content and the access to students to have knowledge and the service schools provide?
Use your words. Parents' rights would mean that all families actually have a voice. Do not let them take away the moniker of parents' rights. There are parents in this room right now that would not advocate for taking content away. There's always been a place for transparency. There's always been policy that supports opt-out. It's fine for parents and families and educators to be focused on what is age appropriate. It is not fine for people to be advocating for bigotry and racism, et cetera. Like, that is where we need to call the line. So I think it's really important to remind folks that this is not about parents' rights. This is about hate, fascism, et cetera.
That's true, and let's meet them where they are, which is to say, what about parents' rights? So the 14th Amendment enshrines that there are two things that we should be talking about as it relates to parents' rights. And this is all in the Equal Protection Clause. One is equal treatment. A government body or state must treat an individual in the same manner as others in similar conditions or circumstances. The second thing they're entitled to is what? Due process, which says that government actors must follow certain procedures before they can discriminate. Let's ask ourselves a couple of questions. Why the fuck are states allowed to discriminate against people?
Great question to ask.
How is it that we are having conversations prioritizing this idea of parents' rights above and beyond what children who are served by the schools that these parents birth and send them to actually need?
That's right.
It should frustrate everyone that prior to this proliferation of anti-LGBTQ and anti-black bills, that children who were assumed to be, I told you I was coming back to the footnote, children who were assumed to be queer, trans, or gender expansive do not have the same rights as their peers. Right. And so again, so much of what frustrates this about me is that I know grown adults, people at their big age, who engage in queer, romantic, and intimate, sometimes sexual relationships, who will never identify as a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. Never. Never. And at this point, we have grown adults like the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, who stand up in pulpits and call LGBTQIA+ children garbage. When children are simply trying to figure out what we birth them into.
That's right, who they are as a human.
And it is the reality that most often, it is the fact that the vast majority of kids in public schools now identify as anything other than strictly heterosexual. That's not to say if people talk to them that they engage in queer sex, but they understand that these boxes that we want them to fit into were not designed for them to survive, let alone thrive. So I want us to shift the conversation away from the co-option of parents' rights to talk about the obligation we have to support students and their needs with regard to learning and development. Holistically, I'm so tired of us debating about whether or not we want to use somebody's pronouns. I taught kindergarten.
Right.
If my kid wanted to be called Batman, I'll call them Batman.
Hello. That's right.
If you can't use they, them, and theirs, which as a grammarian is proper.
Right.
There are all kinds of other professions for you.
There are. Because
similarly, when we want to talk about parents and their rights, you have a right as a parent to ensure that your child has equal access to opportunities. We haven't talked about the fact that one of the consequences of this war is that there are so many more black families who are not sending their kids to school.
That's right. Pods.
And so what I say to some of these families who show up screaming parents' rights, who actually don't have kids who go to public schools, is you have the right to go elsewhere. Some of this for me is about calling to task the things that are often hidden, what black feminists refer to as a matrix of domination, the signs, systems, and symbols that allow white supremacy to be omnipresent, yet hyper invisible, and us not actually answering some of these questions, but just saying this is bullshit. And I'm not playing this game. It's the Toni Morrison of it all. I'm not engaging in the things that y'all want us to do because it's a distraction from the fact that y'all are actually losing. And by mathematical permutations, y'all should win shit.
But you are.
But we do live under minority rule. And so it is important for us to show up and vote and be engaged. So many of you all are in states where the minority are controlling all of the policy, et cetera. And so the local work is very important. And in fact, you can win. So if you look at November's election results, you can win. All you have to do is show up. It ain't gonna cost you more than $500, $1,000. You can gather folks across all kinds of issue areas to kick them out of office if they have taken over, or to keep them from getting. And so while it is a well-funded initiative, they're not as strategic as we give them credit for.
They don't have to be.
They say all kinds of stuff that's crazy outside, and so you really do need to call that out. We cannot be silent, is my larger message, and I agree that a lot of it is bullshit.
That's the technical term.
Yeah.
I love that. I will use that. I'll be citing you, Dr. Johns. Thank you for
Tell
that.
them I said it.
I will tell them. Okay, so as we wrap up, and I know that we could have continued this conversation for a whole lot longer, but as we bring this portion to a close, this is a final question I want to think about. And I do it in two parts. Number one, I want you to think about what strategies you recommend, and I'm going to put you two in a spot because we've got like 4-ish minutes, so I'm going to give y'all a number. I want each of you to come up with 2 big strategies that communities facing these challenges related to book bans could begin to employ. So give me 2 of those. Give us 2 of those. But then, looking ahead, what do you believe would be some critical next steps? So 2 strategies for combating the book bans, and then 2 more strategies for possible next steps.
Most of you in the room are going to know this, but go find a coalition that is unlikely and help them get louder on your issue and do the same for them. That's really important in this moment, because what we do need to do is to expand the middle, because in a polarized environment, people are either afraid to come out or they got to go to one side because that's all they know. So it is very important, and David and I know this because we've been working together for the duration, that you need to have allies and you need to show up, or co-conspirators, you need to show up for somebody else so that they show up for you. So that strategy is really important. The other thing is, let's be local and let's be state. Everybody cares about the presidential, okay, cool. But whoever wins in November, these issues are going to be enduring in your school and for your educators. So for those educators that are ready to take the risk and do the right thing, we need to make sure we show up for them. And we need to be active so that they don't lose their certification or get fired or get knocked out. That is particularly hard hit our black and brown teachers, educators.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. If this were Instagram, I would double tap that. I think to the point about being fired, again, I want to push on this, which is that we should prioritize our children over our privilege, and if that means that you got to find another job, then figure that shit out.
Yeah.
So this is like the Carmita Surge Institute, which is that those of us who do this work, understanding that education is a calling for most of us, should be prepared to be fired and be building a bench to come behind us to pick up the work and have a trampoline to bounce from. Semicolon. You asked about strategies. My first is that we should ask the babies. The thing that I'm most proud of working for, still my president, Barack Hussein Obama, his fabulous wife, Michelle Obama Robinson Obama, Sasha Malia, Sonny Bo, Grandma Robinson too, is that we produced a series of summits that were designed to do 3 things. One is center students in these conversations. It pisses me off when we do the TFA thing. I'm not sorry, but when we do the TFA thing of saying that like student voice is important, but then we render them voiceless by reading letters from them.
Yeah.
It was also designed to keep adults from having conversations about students without them being present. And one, to force adults to listen. This is when like the meme of Mateo was really popular, like listen, listen, Linda, listen. And so we produced these summits all around the country with Ebony Magazine, Johnson Publishing Company. And the one rule is that the only people who got to sit on stages like this they had to be students. And we asked them different things depending on what the community needs were, but the one question we asked everyone was, what do you need to thrive? And we let them answer, and then the adults in the room were responsible for answering that. And so I offer that as a solution for whatever the problem is that you're facing. Let the babies answer it. The second is to resist. I said it earlier, I mean it with my full chest. This is what the young people call standing on business. Like, this is a moment where we acknowledge that that we should not be beholden to tyrants who have been elevated to positions to do the work of white supremacy. Right. There's a sermon Dr. King preached at Ebenezer called But If Not, where he talks about Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego being forced to kneel at the feet of this idol God who shows up like Ronald Deion DeSantis, and they resist. And what they say is, I trust, I know, I have this sense. Right? What they try to say, black people wanted to be free. They try to say, what, Dryptomania, that you were crazy. No, we have this sense that there are things that we should be doing, and we're obligated to do them no matter what. So some of this is just that we should be resisting.
We should.
You tell me I can't say that, I'm going to say it. You tell me I can't do this, I'm going to display it. You tell me I'm going to do the things that are required for my babies to know that I love them and it is my job to support them. And if you can't do that, find somebody else who can do it with you until you can do it on your own, and don't go alone. In terms of next steps, I invite all of y'all to join me and MBJC in June. We're having an Equity Week, a series of activities and events. Some will include conversations like this. Some will also infuse things like our history of ballroom as a cultural expression of Black queer brilliance, and also anchor us in demanding the kinds of legislative changes that would support all of what we've been talking about. You can go to mbjc.org to find that. The last thing is that I just got really excited sitting here looking at the audience because we've been talking about like things that are explicitly for me about Black students because I care most about them, but things that affect people based on race and ethnicity. And I just want to say hi to all of the white people in the room. The thing that I really want to challenge you all to do is to leverage your privilege for good. It is too often the case, I don't want them to miss this. It is too often the case that y'all get to sit back and listen in moments like this and feel charged or challenged or good, and then don't have to do anything with it. And I submit to you that it is your obligation, the price of the ticket that you paid to be in this room to experience all of this brilliance is to do something disruptive with it. The goal shouldn't be to be an ally. Please don't talk to me about being an ally. It makes my skin crawl because too many of y'all watch RuPaul's Drag Race, you download Todrick Hall, you donate to HRC, so you feel good about being an ally. I want to know how you are in this uncomfortably, protractedly, when it don't feel good, such that we can be co-conspirators in this. I got real excited about that and want to talk to y'all about what y'all gonna do about it. Sincerely.
Sincerely. And on that note.
That's a good way to end.
On that note, be loud and be local and get uncomfortable. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. And a great transition into our next panel. But while they're getting seated, I did want to remind everyone that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley will be joining us a little bit later to talk about her Book Saves Lives Act. She will be here excited to talk about specifically why book bans need to be stopped, the work that she's doing to increase restrictions against those who are trying to criminalize librarians, as well as pushing you all to advocacy. So again, she will be here a little later, so please get excited for that. But before we go into the next panel, I did want to note that our original moderator, Preston Mitchum, is not here with us today because he got a call from Bravo. So he's gonna be on Watch What Happens Live. Andy is a bit more of a celebrity than Amisha Cross is. However, as the first Black LGBT cast member of a lead series on Bravo, and a lawyer, and an LGBT advocate, and someone who has worked tirelessly to ensure that students feel safe on campuses, be it whether it's in the K-12 system or in the higher ed space. He also does consulting in this space. He felt it necessary to submit a video for all of us to talk to you about what's at stake and what all of you can do to be able to make change for the young people who are being forced into these very, very difficult positions. I think that we're ready to tee that one up.
Greetings. I'm Preston Mitchum. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of PDM Consulting, LLC, a multi-purpose consulting firm headquartered in Washington, D.C., focused on the power of Black people, of LGBTQ+ people, and of young people. If you're watching this video, surely you know all about the importance of teaching curriculum about LGBTQ+ people, Black people, and Latino people. Hopefully we'll expand this message to everyone, especially our naysayers. But it is so incredibly important that we obviously learn about the history and lessons of teaching those three communities. I think back to my childhood growing up in Ohio in the Midwest, and even when I went to law school in the South in North Carolina, something remained abundantly clear, unfortunately. Many lessons about me, about people who look like me, about the communities that I care about, were not included in schools and certainly not in the education curricula. even when I went to law school and graduated from law school, so many of our lessons of our heroes and sheroes and ancestors and transcestors were never thought about. Unfortunately, for many of us, especially those of us who are school-aged, far too often it means that we don't think we're cared about, or frankly, a lot of times it means that we don't think we exist. I've always stated that I want to be a young person's possibility model so that one day they can actually see people like themselves in me. It is so important that we teach this curricula. It's important that Black people know that we exist far beyond the transatlantic slave trade. It's so important that LGBTQ plus people know about the history of Pride and the Stonewall riots and really the uprisings that took place years before the uprisings at the Stonewall Inn. When we see that we exist, we know that our history is great, we know that our legacy is important, and we know that we are destined for greatness in the future. It is so important that things like books about our rich histories be taught and not be banned. It's clear that our opponents may claim to hate intersectionality and intersectional issues, but unfortunately, they sure do know how to attack intersectional issues. And so it is up to us to keep fighting, keep revving the drumbeat, keep beating the streets, keep making our voices heard. It's incredibly important that we see the power of progress and the purpose of our legacy, our richness, our diversity of experiences and thought. Please, please, please keep fighting for our history. And thank you so very much to the Education Trust for allowing me to create this video. I wish I could be there with you all in person, but trust me, I know that you're being fed with so many spoonfuls of richness of the conversation. Thank you so very much, and I really hope you have a great event.
Well, I do think that in addition to Preston, Dr. Harding teed up this next segment very well. So we do have another panel coming. When we're talking about advocacy, we have to recognize that obviously this is an election year. But aside from that, advocacy, particularly when we're looking at book bans, when we're looking at curriculum restrictions, when we're looking at people deciding what should go in our history books, what shouldn't go into our history books, what history we should learn, what doesn't quantify as history, whose history is actually taught. That happens at the state and local level. The rubber meets the road in state legislatures, in school board meetings, in city council meetings. All politics is local, and that is no more true than when we're talking about our K-12 education system. Librarians, unfortunately, right now are caught in the middle, where their jobs not only face scrutiny as book bans expand, but there's also criminalization. Many of these librarians could face jail time simply for providing popular book titles like Handmaid's Tale, The Bluest Eye, and nearly any book that speaks to LGBTQ issues. Arkansas, Indiana, and Missouri are the first 3 states that have mounted bills that include criminalization of librarians. That means jail time. That means that in addition to the fines and fees we've seen pop up across multiple states, these 3 states have taken the charge to actually pursue locking up librarians for simply providing books that young people want to read, books that they can see themselves in, and characters that matter to their daily lives. If you're curious about how we got here, I can give you a long version, but for the sake of time, I'll give you the TikTok version. America's a great country founded on the principles of our Constitution. All men are created equal. That sounds good in theory, but that statement didn't include women. It didn't include minorities. It didn't extend to Black people, who were only considered as 3/5 of people anyway. It also didn't include, technically it didn't include poor white people either. For far too long, America's democracy wasn't inclusive. And if some people get what they want, it never will be. The post-racial society that we were all promised when the first Black president got elected in Barack Obama was quickly met with backlash. The racial reckoning that was supposed to happen after the George Floyd protests led to anti-DEI efforts. The Black Lives Matter movement didn't materialize into people actually caring about black lives. Actually, according to the FBI, the biggest threat to American democracy is the racial apathy and the violence that we've seen precipitated over the past few years, right here in America. The biggest threat to American democracy is race-based violence. It is not outside, it is inside. And the battle for our nation's democracy, the battle for protection of that democracy, uplifting of it, has historically always fallen on the backs of black people, often people who are not seen or included in the very democracy that we are talking about today. Schools weren't integrated easily. We can recall the Little Rock Nine. We can talk about Ruby Bridges. We can talk about even up to present day, years after Brown v. Board, schools in America are more segregated today than they were at the height of the civil rights movement. That is purposeful. Today, when you have the majority of your schools serving black, brown, and immigrant students, 80% of the teacher workforce is white female. Teacher diversity is not present. Moreover, book bans, curriculum censorship, attacks on our history disproportionately impact marginalized communities. David Johns talked about that a minute ago. They silence the voices and the perspectives of the people around us, of the people in our communities, but they also silence the voices that can actually speak towards what's going on not only in America but outside of it. There is a great big world around us that isn't homogenous. And if we do not learn how to accept other cultures, how to understand other cultures, it also helps us to understand something about ourselves and the place we have in this world. Our histories, our heroes, our experiences, they're all valid, regardless of what the opposition tells us. But that truth that we can't be erased, hasn't stopped conservative groups, and I name and shame, that's what I do here. That hasn't stopped groups like the Heritage Foundation, America First Legal, conservatives across America, that's a long list, so I'm not gonna include that, from pushing to reverse a world that they feel is slipping away. That's what's happening, and it's dangerous. They call progress for people of color reverse racism. They call teaching about black history wokeness. They call speaking out against the atrocities that have happened towards black people, divisive concepts. It's called American history. If you don't like who we are as a country, how we got here, you are not going to be able to understand how to get out of this mess. One of the things that we want to make sure of is that we continue to fight, we continue to advocate, and in the words of the great philosopher Beyonce, it's time for all of us to get in formation. So I am honored to be joined by an esteemed panel of experts in advocacy who are going to share their insights and strategies for defending students' rights to learn, teachers' rights to provide authentic curriculum, as well as represent America's truths and its diversity. Come on up, guys. Our panel includes Christopher Bruce from the ACLU of Georgia, Nellie Powell from Ed Trust Tennessee, Kurt Russell, the 2022 Teacher of the Year, and Kai Jefferson, a student advocate and a voice out of the state of Louisiana. So Kai, I think I'm going to actually start with you. Don't get shy now. What made you want to get involved in advocacy against book bans, and what has it meant to you to be reflected in curriculum?
Okay. First off, I just always been a type of person that's very helpful. I always wanted to fight for others, and that just includes student advocacy being one. Book bans really stood out to me just because it's like that's the opportunity that a student gets to experience, to see more in the world. Without books, I don't think we would really have the literacy that we have right now. I don't think we would have the opportunity as students to be able to expand our knowledge. So really being involved into book bans caught my attention just because it's something that really will affect the K-12 system or just affect the United States in general.
Alrighty, and the next question I'm going to ask of Chris Bruce and the rest of the panel. So Chris, in recent years, we've seen a surge in efforts to ban books deemed controversial or objectionable by certain groups. How do book bans threaten academic freedom and exchange of diverse ideas in our P-12 system?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Ed Trust, for convening this. This is very important. And as we just heard from my esteemed colleague right there, a young man, we know that book bans deal with situations that we shouldn't be dealing with right now. When we're talking about America is already having a lower literacy rate, and you want to take away books and the free exchange of ideas, that's an issue. And let's be clear, you said it's a recent surge. I want to harp on that. Recent surge. This has always happened since the beginning of this country, and not just this country, like you were saying before, autocratic, authoritarian countries ban books. You can trace this back to before, right after the Civil War, where the North did win and where slavery was abolished in certain ways. It's still dealing with the effects of it. But you also had the Daughters of the Confederacy coming forth and having a surge to ban books. So the ideals, which I don't understand why people don't read this, is a great, phenomenal document. It's called the Constitution, right? And then they paired it with another piece called the Bill of Rights. And that First Amendment, the first one, literally the fundamental principles of your First Amendment deal with the marketplace of exchange and ideas. If you do not have that, then you do not have a democracy. You do not have a free flow of ideas or anything else. Anything that is banning books, it jeopardizes your freedom of assembly. It jeopardizes your freedom to express yourself as well as others that are around you. So yes, anything that has to deal with book bans, it is vitally important for our democracy to stand that book bans are completely erased, and we actually encourage more types of books and every type of discussion that you have out there.
Bailey, we know that this has come up in the great state of Tennessee multiple times, and that you've done an amazing job of advocacy work in the Tennessee state legislature around it as well. Could you tell us a little bit about the book ban and the curriculum challenges that are going on in Tennessee and what Trust Tennessee has been working on?
Absolutely. So, hi everyone. So great to be with you. My name is Maylee, and I, through my role, convene the Tennessee Alliance for Equity in Education. 7 of our partners are here with me today. I'm very excited. Shout out Tennessee. A subset of that alliance that I launched 2 years ago is called the Tennessee Coalition for Truth in Our Classrooms. I'm really dedicated to protecting our communities from censorship, convening stakeholders that both care and are impacted by this issue, but really thinking about how do we shift that statewide narrative to say what the majority knows is true. And so when thinking about book bans, to give some Tennessee context, first, we are #1 in the country in terms of the most number of laws that restrict what teachers can say and what students can do in the classroom. I joked that I was at a conference and someone said, "Congratulations." I said, "No, that's not a good thing." But thinking about one law in particular, in 2022, which is the year after the first, we are also the first state with a prohibited concepts law that was filed and passed we saw the passing of the Age-Appropriate Materials Act of 2022. And this requires schools to post all of their library books online. And this was deeply felt by educators because it was not only libraries, but classroom libraries. So we were seeing teachers come in on the weekend, having to catalog their books, and I also come to this space as a past first grade and third grade reading teacher, and rather than instilling that joy in reading, you're focusing on what books are on my shelf to have them subject to review by the district. We also have a new amendment moving through that mandates or making that more specific to sexually explicit materials that can be removed. So that means that if books now contain nudity, even part of the book, that can be removed. And I think about a recent threat or a statistic I saw from the Scholastic Kids and Family Reading Report. 67% of children ages 6 to 17 find books to read for fun at school. And that's really important because we also know that for students from particularly lower income communities, that percentage is even higher. And also, when these laws are moving, we hear things like, oh, kids can just go to the public library or to the store to get a book. But we know that that's saying that assuming they have that transportation and those extra dollars to do that. And thinking about the chilling effect that the past panel just talked about, and those over 4,000 books that you just spoke to, we know that those over 4,000 books are just what's been reported. And thinking about in Tennessee, when the Age-Appropriate Materials Act was moving through the Tennessee General Assembly, we saw in one district alone, 300 books were moved preemptively to the law passing. All of those authors were LGBTQ, authors of color, and again, removed before that law even passed. And to give two examples, our coalition has now over 25 organizations across the state. In Chattanooga, our partner Moms for Social Justice said that one parent came to them because their teacher said that they gave away all of their books because they didn't want them to be the local policy was that you had to attach your name to the list of books. So they didn't want to have that fear of having a penalty for that. The second example I want to give is our partner API Middle Tennessee did an amazing book fundraiser, raised $15,000 to get API authored books into a district. That district rejected the books, and I actually just spoke to a leader from that organization. And my question is, can you even name a book by an API author? Because what are we actually talking about here in terms of what our students need, to be reflective on the show?
And Kurt Russell, veteran teacher here. 2022 Teacher of the Year. I'm going to keep saying that. You know a little bit about divisive concepts and what the opposition is trying to work to eradicate in our schools. Some of it has affected you as well. When we talk about divisive concepts and anti-equity curricula in the classroom or the focal point of the classroom, how does this advancement of bills reflective of the perpetuate harmful stereotypes and hinder efforts to address systemic inequities?
Yes, great question. And once again, thank you so much for having me. As a history teacher, I always love telling stories. So if you don't mind, allow me just to share a story with you that will connect.
I know what's coming.
Yes.
I have yet to meet a history teacher who isn't a storyteller.
That's right, we love stories. This was 1977. This was Eastwood Elementary School. My school, I was a kindergarten student. And there was 15 students in the classroom. And out of the 15 students in the classroom, 13 students of color, 12 black students. And it was February. And every Friday in kindergarten, I remember this vividly, every Friday we had something that the teacher called like show and tell, that many schools across the country have even today. And so Miss Toss, this middle-aged white woman, and race plays an important part to this story. Miss Toss, this middle-aged white woman, said, I'm going to read a story to you. And the story began as young Martin. And every turn of the page was someone who looked like me. And the story was about Martin Luther King Jr. Before the national iconic day, before Martin Luther King holiday, Ms. Toss was intentional about empowering her students because she looked across and saw 12 students, 13 students of color, 12 black students in her classroom. And this middle-aged white woman said, I need to empower these students. Because of that, I became a teacher. So you see how powerful it is when you have a curriculum that students feel connected to. And when students feel as though they are empowered, when students feel as though they belong, then when you have a curriculum that is against that, then stereotypes build up. Then you have individuals who don't feel good about themselves. Then you have individuals and students who go through trauma within the school district. And that's why so many black students are not in education today or going to education because of the trauma that they experience. Who in the heck will go into a profession that has mistreated them for so long? Right? Who will go into a profession that does not value who they are? And so it just builds those stereotypes when you have a curriculum that is not beneficial to all students.
Thank you for that. Chris, we know that LGBTQ plus erasure is something that's happening across the country. K-12 education is one of the targets. Most recently in the women's basketball tournament, we also heard the commentary that came from a right-wing media source that basically attacked Dawn Staley for not coming out and, basically throwing trans women under the bus. They were aiming for that. And she was derided for days outside of the championship about that topic. What are some concrete steps that schools and policymakers can take to ensure that LGBTQ plus identities are affirmed, acknowledged, and celebrated in educational settings?
Well, I want to start off with saying Dawn Staley and everything that she's accomplished already. I was watching the March Madness on the women's side when I was watching it on the men's side, and it was amazing. For those type of situations where people honestly laughed at ESPN for carrying these type of sports, women's sports, exclusively women's basketball, and they were like, there's no way you're going to make money off of it. And then to have the Final Four game being the highest rated game, highest watched game, that beats out the National Basketball Association, beats out NFL games that have ever been aired on ESPN. It really shows more into investment. It's not that women's basketball was poor, it's that nobody invested in women's basketball. And that goes along with everything that deals with academics and investment. Like you were saying before, having a teacher that pours into children of their interests, of everything else. Even when something's not popular, when something's controversial, when everybody else is telling you that you're wrong or you shouldn't be thinking those thoughts or anything else, you may have a teacher there that can actually pour into you and saying, no, this is right, and you can be you. You can be you in an unabashed, celebratory type of manner. And that's what we need, but it can't just be teachers. It has to be parents, it has to be the community, it has to be everyone else, especially policymakers. The problem that we have is a lot of times we speak in echo chambers. This is an echo chamber. I hope that we all have the same goal here. I do. I'm guessing because if you're here right now, you're here for a reason and a purpose to take this back to your communities. The question and the thing that I get hammered on all the time is, I don't just talk to the echo chamber. I go in front of policymakers who often tell me I'm wrong, who often tell me this is not American or anything within this. And I was like, there's nothing more American than diversity. Yes. And then bringing it to them and then challenging them. Like, it's going to their districts, it's going to all their type of situations and going to their communities, especially policymakers. I have to thank Tennessee for a second because the same policies that y'all started off with, it gave us a game plan to fight. And while we do have divisive concepts that have passed in Georgia, a lot of the other book bans and things that have happened did not pass because we took y'all's playbook, got ahead of it, talked to lawmakers, went into their districts, talk to their people that they have these issues with of saying, hey, you need to go talk to this individual. Because I don't know if you guys have talked to a lawmaker before. Their number one job is not really to represent you. Their number one job is to be reelected. So if I can bring 20, 30 people saying, if you do or you vote for this, I'm not voting for you. That's how you change the narrative. That's how you change people's minds of saying, well, they have to go to the speaker or they have to go to the majority leader and saying, well, I can't vote for this because I know my district's not going to vote for me anymore. So yes, it starts on the local level. It starts in the classroom. It starts with parents and it starts with teachers. But go and confront those policymakers or people who you said, I would never talk to. Start that conversation, because when you start that conversation, you start changing things.
This next one's for you. So in addition to being our student voice on this panel, you also are a CEO of a local organization in the great state of Louisiana. He's kind of a big deal. Give him a shout out. Very humble young man, but doing a lot of work. How do you empower other students? How do you help to build for advocacy for young people?
Yeah, first and foremost, yeah, you know, CEO here, Boston CEO. I don't know if you guys watch TikTok. But first and foremost, the youth community of BR, I basically started my 12th grade year of high school. I graduated class of 2023, best to ever do it.
Take back that humility.
Wow. The reason I actually started it was because, again, as I said earlier, like I've always been the type of person to help others. And so I saw, looking at my city, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I saw that there wasn't an organization out there teenager based. I did my research. I was like, there's no groups out here that's ran by teens. I mean, you have adults that's maybe running organizations that have teenagers in it, but is there a teenager 100% led? And that was the focus since day one. CRY is the focus I came up with, community, resources, and youth. I'm really cool. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So CRY, community, resources, and youth. Community service is what we provide. Providing resources, whether that's student advocacy, assisting with mental health. Free tutoring is a new program that we're just starting to activate. And youth, supporting youth. Everything we do is youth-based. Logo made by a teenager, shirts made by teenagers, events ran by teenagers. Everything is youth-based. And so in a way, I use the youth community of BR to allow other students to come in and say, and able to operate a nonprofit. We're not 501c3 yet, but we are a state nonprofit. I allow students to come in, give them different positions, like, hey, do you want to be a manager? Do you want to be a vice president? And they're able to actually run the business. I always tell them every single time, run it as if it is your business. Because soon I'm going to be 30 years old, 40 years old. I am 18. I'm not going to claim 19 till May 11, okay? But one day I will be 30. One day I will be 40.
You're just up here making everybody feel old.
I'm sorry. But
one day I will.
Yes. One day. I'm not there yet. I'm still a teenager myself. Until we're 20 years old, I'm still a teenager. But one day, like, you know, when I'm up in that age, I still, I'm sorry, no offense. When I do get to that age, I don't know how else to word it. When I do make it to that age, I do plan on still having the youth community of BR. And I don't plan on being the one that's mainly running it. I want to continue having it 100% teenager-based led. And so I feel like the President of the United States right now. I'm not good with my jokes, but that's great. Okay, so yes, I use the youth community of BR to my advantage, allowing those students the opportunity to run a nonprofit organization. When we show up to events, they're like, oh my God, like who runs that? Your boy. I mean, you know, like, but it's 100% teenager led. Doing the free tutoring. College students are who I'm recruiting right now to actually be tutors. We actually just collaborated with a high school in Baton Rouge that lacks in community service hours, and they're in need of tutoring assistance. So we're able to, that's a win-win right there. I mean, standing on business. Like what he said earlier, standing on business right there. That's a win-win. We're able to offer free tutoring from college students are able to teach high schoolers. This isn't, I'm not gonna say it. I don't want to offend anyone again.
You already made us feel like
I'm sorry. I am deeply sorry. This is college students teaching high school, tutoring high schoolers. Soon I want to expand it to middle school. I want to expand it to elementary school. Also with the community service, their goal is to have 50 plus hours a month. Your boy can get to 100. You know, so just being able to use an organization that's 100% teenager led allows the opportunity for us to be great. My mentor, my teacher always say, "You're brilliant. You're brilliant." So I always just tell my team, like, run it as if it is your own. Elevate, continue to do great. So yeah, does that answer your question?
It was great. You are better positioned than a lot of CEOs who are in their 30s or 40s. Go ahead. Kurt.
Yes.
Are teachers' hands tied in all of this? Some we know are leaving the classroom. The teacher pipeline was already shrinking. If we talk about black teachers, it's even smaller.
Yes.
Are these extreme policies pushing teachers out of the classroom? And if they are, what can we do to ensure that teachers feel comfortable in those spaces and continue on in this process?
You know, there's a lot of things that we could factor into teachers leaving the profession. Probably the biggest is the lack of respect. Right? And we could look at the lack of respect in terms of pay, the lack of respect in terms of autonomy in the classroom, the lack of respect in terms of the value that is placed upon the profession itself. But at the same time, this pushback towards teachers has really caused, especially black and brown teachers, to leave the profession. The one thing that we can do, especially for black and brown individuals going into the profession, is number one, is to provide them with a sense of purpose. There's not anyone who would like to go into a profession, as I said earlier, that the profession does not treat them as a professional. And then number two, the one thing that we have to do is to make sure, and we say this earlier, we have to vote for local officials, especially the school board, to really create policies to recruit black and brown teachers. Recruitment, mentorship is the key. I had a great mentor, Mr. Larry Thomas. Mr. Larry Thomas, the first black male teacher I ever had. 8th grade teacher. When I became an educator, he was my principal, and he mentored me all along. And I stayed in the profession because I knew someone was there to support me. There's a lot of black and brown educators who are by themselves in schools, are in these silos where they have no one to turn to. And so mentorship is the way to keep teachers in the forefront and also to make sure that we do a better job of recruiting them.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Can I add on really quick? And I'd like to add on to that. I think there's really also exposure. So one thing, like, I don't think everybody knows this about me, but in high school, I actually attended EMT school, went through the phase, something happened to where they were like, we can't test. I went to Southeastern University for 1 semester. I actually chose elementary education. And I went to nursing, and then I went back to elementary education, went to nursing, went back. I changed my major about 6 times. Don't judge me. So the exposure, I was able in middle school, Miss Sierra Hart, let them see your beautiful face. Miss Hart, I like to use her as an example all the time because she is one of many educators that stayed in my life. When I got to high school, Mr. Wisham, he wasn't actually my teacher, but he was a school administrator. So being able to be exposed to teachers like that are actually there for the students, that are always backing the students up, made me say, I want to go into education. Now, the reason I chose elementary, okay, I was just telling the story earlier, really quick. I wasn't choosing high school. That was a no-no. I just graduated high school, and I was like, I'm not going back over there. And middle school, I was like, I don't know if I can deal with it. But elementary school actually what stood out to me was representation. There wasn't, every time I looked, I've never had a black male educator. Well, I'm sorry, in elementary school. I had a black female educator, but I never had a black male educator. And I actually, at the time when I was at Southeastern, I actually went through a whole bunch of elementary schools and looking at the teachers, like the staff directory, I've seen maybe about 2. Like out the whole city of BR. Now maybe there probably was more, but from what I saw. And so that what made me choose, that's what made me choose elementary education. Now unfortunately I did leave Southeastern, went back to EMT school, so hopefully your boy can soon become a paramedic. So yeah.
Now, I do want to take live questions from our audience. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand. The panel is here, and we will start directing those questions now. There are floating mics out here somewhere. One of them is going to be mine.
Are y'all ready?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bryn Martin. I'm out of Kentucky. You all are fabulous. Thanks for taking this time to share with us and for us to see the inside of that goes with your beautiful outside. So thank you. You had mentioned that we really need to expand our diversity and our recruitment. But how are we going to do that at this point when so many states, especially in our state, are trying to get legislation that's making it almost illegal to do that, to use the words diversity and to talk about inclusion and some of those other words that we know mean to hire outside of what we're used to?
Yes, ma'am. A coalition is needed, right? In Philadelphia, there's a organization, hope I'm getting Center of Black Education, right? Sharif Mecca, doing wonderful work in regards to really getting young people at a young age, middle school and high school, and really mentoring them and supporting them into the profession of being a teacher. And so building strong coalition that will support and guide and mentor young people into the field, because you cannot do it alone. It's too much baggage, it's too many policies that is distracting. But if we have a strong support group, if we have people like you who are willing to go to school boards and demand that you hire black and brown teachers, that you demand to treat teachers with due respect, then that's what is needed. And that's how you could really start recruiting this pipeline of black educators. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, definitely would add to that. And through our coalition, we've really seen the power of connecting such diverse stakeholders in one room that all care about the same thing. So we have students, librarians, parents, org leaders, but we also have state leaders and national leaders that sit in to provide that context. And then thinking about the role of community leaders, to your question of pushing for this, it's really important to challenge the dominant narrative and highlight what the majority wants. So we know that most parents want classrooms to be places of learning and not political battlegrounds. We also know that the majority of voters oppose book bans. In Tennessee alone, 58% of voters strongly oppose. That's closer to 70% for somewhat oppose. And one tactic that our coalition did in terms of your messaging question is run statewide digital ads across the state with our partner Rally to do message testing about what works and what is most engaging the people. It reached a few 100,000 people across the state through Instagram and Facebook. We ran them at the same time that these dangerous censorship bills were moving to see what resonated with voters and students and parents, and found that for an advocacy strategy, that the most important thing was aspirational messaging. So when talking about censorship, we need to say we want to protect our school communities, we want to protect our classroom libraries, and that worked about 83% better than saying stop or what are we opposed to. Really thinking about those, again, aspirational framing, and we also found that educators were one of the top amplifiers to that message.
I'm so tired. I feel like I can't even stand up. But it's been so powerful hearing you all speak. My name is Yvette Russell, and I represent Read Alliance, and I'm part of the Equity Coalition in New York. Our organization works with teenagers, and we give them an opportunity. We train them to actually tutor little kids in reading, right? So it is incredible to have a little kid look up to a teenager. They're cool. They're working with them to improve in their reading, and they do. Scientific based, and I can give you guys a whole spiel about that. But I think the idea of us creating a pipeline for our young people to become educators is not only a powerful one and a necessary one, but once they get into that field, right, we have to also think about the support that we provide them. If we can't even protect their educational system right now that is going to value them when they're learning, how do we protect them and ensure that they can continue to become educators and also be supported while they're in that process? A young black male becoming a young educator is a goal, right? We want that to happen. But what systems are we willing to work toward to put into place, and what are the coalitions that exist now to support them once they are educators? Your thoughts on that, or just giving that food for thought?
She asked a tough question.
It is a tough question. It is a tough question, but I think about it often.
I don't have a mic, so I have to yell now.
I guess for me, like, I didn't actually leave Southeastern just because I didn't want to be a teacher. I actually was motivated to become a teacher. I mean, I still think about it. I just already knew. I was exposed to emergency medical services. I was exposed to the medical aspect, and I just had an interest in it and since high school. So that's what led me to go back into EMT to become a paramedic, et cetera. But I think more so when I was in the education major field, I think it was more so of a pushback. One, teacher pay. Honestly, a medic makes nearly the same almost as a teacher, but it's like we categorize a teacher as something bad just because of pay. But when I switched to become a medic, it was, oh, that's great. And it's still nearly the same pay as a teacher. Two, I mean, I think if we had the more so, I guess I'm trying to figure out a wording. It was a hard question for me, I'm sorry.
Let's go.
I guess more so continue to have that support, exposing us. I think at a very early age, I mean, if they're allowing 16-year-olds to go work on an ambulance and respond to shootings, et cetera, I think they can allow 16-year-olds to be in the classroom with a teacher one-on-one, you know? And I don't think we have that right now. I think it's more so what we're just seeing inside the classroom. Oh, this teacher doesn't put my grades in on time. Oh yeah, I can be no teacher. Yeah, I'll be going off with the parents, et cetera, you know? But if I can firsthand work with you and see what it's like being a teacher, I think I'll be better exposed to it to say, okay, this is something I want to do. And again, like as I said, like I mean, I still had an interest in being a teacher. There's nothing pushing me back from being a teacher. Again, like it's nearly still the same pay as a pay. Honestly, doesn't matter to me. I'm just that kid, you know. The elementary kids will love me, you know. But just again, I guess what I'm trying to say is just continuously having that support, exposing us, as I said earlier, and also just making the education system better right now is something that I think would expose more young black male educators to become, well, more young black males to become educators in the future. I don't know if that really answered the question.
Well, I'd like to hear from you, the teacher of the year. Like,
yes.
Thank you so much, and you did a great job.
You did great, man.
Thank you.
You did great.
Yeah. You know, it's when you mention coalition, I always really focus on coalition on a local level. And I really see coalition within school districts and within buildings. And the reason why, I say this often, the reason why I remained for 28 years teaching is, number one, I love the profession. I love kids. I love everything about this. But number two, I had individuals who poured a spirit of love into me, a spirit of you can do this within. And that is what kept me for 28 years within the classroom because I had that mentorship. And so I never view coalition as being something that is large in regards to national or even state. I always view coalition as being something that is localized. What are school districts doing? What are particular schools, buildings are doing in order to keep teachers in the classroom? And that's where it started. And so I had great allies who supported me my first few years of teaching, and I do the same now as a veteran teacher. So it starts within the school itself, creating that culture of being safe, a culture of having some type of autonomy, a culture of where you are able to express yourself culturally and your identity within the classroom. And sometimes you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Right? You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable as a teacher. And the one thing I'm so discouraged about is when we always mention that students can't handle things where we shouldn't teach hard because students can't handle it. Students can handle it. It's adults who can't handle it, right? And so when teachers are able to teach, when teachers do not have to deal with the baggage, more teachers, especially more teachers of color, will remain in the classroom.
I think Chris had something.
I want to add both of your questions together. And the reason why is really dealing with, you said coalitions. I understand exactly what you're talking about. I'm part of plenty of coalitions, at least the ACLU is. Coalitions come together because they have a problem that they have a goal about. And then once the problem's solved, it's gone away. It's more of a reactionary type of problem. These problems that we have are institutionalized. They are baked into our society. Racism is institutionalized. Sexism is institutionalized. The attacks on the LGBTQ plus IA, institutionalized. And it's going to take institutions to change that. So there's a lot of people who are scared and don't want to do this type of work, and then there's some people who run towards danger. When I was an attorney, I had a nice law firm, everything was great, making good money, and Donald Trump got elected. And I got a phone call, and I was like, there's got to be something that I can do. And he said, hey, do you want to go lobby? I was like, I never lobbied before. They said, you'll figure it out. And I've been figuring it out and changing the dangers that have happened on a day-to-day basis. So there are people who are out there who hear this about diversity, divisive concepts, or CRT and everything else. And they're saying that's wrong and I want to do something about it. They're in our communities, they're in our neighborhoods. Those are the ones that we should be recruiting. They have that type of passion that's within them. We just, again, need institutions to train them into getting into it and making a difference. They're there. We just need to institutionalize ourselves because, again, not being reactionary, once we solve the problem right now, 10, 15 years, 8 years from now, it's going to come back. So we need to make sure we're not having it come back. We're eliminating it altogether. My job is to put myself out of the job, so we don't have this problem with future generations like this young man, because he's not 20, 30, 40, 50. He doesn't have to deal with it.
And my job is to keep my job here at Intro today. So I'm going to transition and move through this panel, but I do think that your question deserves a little bit more nuance. As someone whose first idea of a profession was education, I wanted to become a teacher. I majored in poli-sci and journalism, but was very interested in becoming a history teacher. Went through originally the TFA program. And even though I graduated as valedictorian of my institution, was a presidential scholar, did all the work from the south side of Chicago, was refused by TFA because at the time, because I'm a fossil, at the time, TFA would rather choose white suburban women who had no experience in urban communities and plot them in some of the hardest, a very strategic process of TFA that eliminated a lot of teachers of color who were very interested in either transitioning into the teaching career or moving into the teaching career who did not major in education. TFA has since changed a lot of its diversity initiatives to bring more people in, but that experience in and of itself was a very hard one to swallow, knowing and growing up and going through those schools what those students needed, in addition to seeing the lack that was there. So I worked in after-school programs, worked in prison education, all types of other things to give back to my community in education that wasn't necessarily tied to the district. And I think that at this point, when we're trying to push for more teachers in the pipeline, we also have to recognize the impediments to actually getting in and staying in that pipeline. Because not everybody wants to see our teachers diverse. And some are working actively against it. The other thing is, I know that there are some great experiences of people who had amazing teachers growing up. And I did have some great ones. But the ones I remember the most are in the opposite direction. My first grade teacher in the great state of Mississippi would show all of the presidents on the wall and ask what they had in common. At the time, they were all white men. And she said that is all they would ever be. I don't know where she is today, but I hope she lived to see the ascendancy of Barack Obama. Sometimes the wrong people are in our classrooms.
Yes, a lot of times. Oh, my.
And with that, I want to see you guys thank our panel one last time. And we are going to move into the next segment of your program. We have a couple of more people who are going to talk to you from the Education Trust, as well as Dr. Tangi Reed-Marshall. So Dr. William Roddick and Dr. Tangi Reed-Marshall, both of them put together an amazing curriculum report that showcases the importance of curriculum that is diverse, curriculum that speaks to the issues of today, and curriculum that is reflective of society. So I'm going to let them come up here and give us a little bit of insight into their work, but also what's coming next.
I'll let you start.
All right. Just one thing to say about what we heard from our panelists is just how urgent this issue is. They made that very clear, especially with Amisha's opening remarks. Bills and policies that are designed to leave library and bookshelves empty are a threat to intellectual freedom and to the diverse discussions that we want in our classrooms, the diverse exchange of ideas that are fundamental to democracy. But these also pose real harm to students, targeting racial identity, targeting gender identity, sexual orientation, and our collective memory, right? How we discuss our history and how that is taught in our schools. An attempt to erase our history, but that can't be erased. And one thing that was discussed a little bit by our panelists that I really want to emphasize here is that even if all the books were back on the shelves, we would still have a lot of work to do. It's just not enough to get them on the shelves. We need to make sure that the materials in our classrooms are engaging our students, that we're really valuing students, that we're identifying that brilliance that was discussed earlier, that we're showing them love, and also that we're challenging them, that we're actually building their critical thinking skills so they can take over the future that we're giving them. And one thing I have to highlight is that we need your partnership in this work. Amisha talked about the site, edtrust.org/takeaction. There we have a host of resources, plenty of advocacy materials, tools. We hope you take advantage of them and reach out. And Tangi.
And so with all of that, we're going to talk about banning books. But we have to ask ourselves another question. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, can Johnny read? Because if Johnny can't read and you put all the books back on the shelf, then we've missed the boat. And there's a much bigger conversation that we have to have that encompasses the idea of taking books off the shelves. And we can talk about that all day, but when we have 85% of Black children not being proficient, so if you have $1, that means only 15 cents out of that dollar represents the proficiency. If we looked around the number of people in this room and we took 85% of us and stood up, that's who can't read proficiently. And so as we think about the notion of removal of books, we're also removing a critical aspect of what it means to get a child to do the thing we call reading. And that's really important to consider. So as we begin to challenge ourselves and look at resources and build coalitions and think through next steps that are viable and really important, let's ask ourselves, how are we going to also address and critically attack the concept, the idea of reading literacy, being a literate person, because then I can get involved in taking critical action. Part of the reason why scare tactics are so simple and so easy is because people can't read. And if you can't read, that means you're easily swayed. So if you want to get people active and you want to build coalitions and you want to stop this notion of things being erased, then tackle the issue of reading. And then folks won't be able to be so easily swayed. And they won't be able to have their books taken off shelves. And schools in Houston won't take their libraries and turn them into detention centers. So, you know, we need to have, yeah, it's a real life thing. I promise you it's happening. So really think through this concomitant relationship between underperformance, lack of literacy, and banning books, because that's the goal. Thank you.
If y'all aren't fired up, you should be. And if you have not gone to edtrust.org and signed up for all of the information regarding this, be absolutely aware that it needs to happen right now, because that toolkit that Maylee spoke about earlier, that has advocacy next steps, that has the language that we've seen work in state after state from Rally, that is available on our website. Make sure that you log on and check that out. In addition to that, I know that several people in this room, as well as online, are state actors. So we want to make sure that you are doing everything that you can in your state and local governments and in your communities to advance the anti-book ban movement, the pro-Black history movement, and ensuring that our histories, our collective histories, will not be erased. The Education Trust stands at the cornerstone of equity. We are not afraid of that word. We have been attacked by some people on the right as well. And in large part because of the strength of the people in this room and the people who've joined us online, who are engaged in this work. It can be long, it can be tiring, it can be arduous, but there has not been a single civil rights win that has come easy. Ironically, there's also not been a single civil rights win that has remained. Unfortunately, the rollback of civil rights era victories happens a whole lot faster than the progress to get to those victories. So we have to consistently be engaged in that fight. David Johns talked about it earlier. It's beyond just allyship. There are white faces in the room, and we're glad to have you. I can't see who's online, but I'm assuming there's white faces there as well. We want to make sure that you're as actively engaged as the Black, brown, LGBTQIA plus members, the system impacted members who are out here fighting for justice and equity every day. We cannot do it alone. We did not get here alone. There are systems and shackles that tie us all, but those systems and shackles also bind us. We want to make sure that we are always fighting, but that we are always looking ahead and understanding the mottos that our ancestors left us with. My grandparents were part of the civil rights movement in Mississippi. There are places that my grandfather could go as a light-skinned, passable black man that my grandmother could not get into. When we think about the areas in which we had separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, separate schools, or you had to stand on buses or go to the back. To some people, because those things aren't true today, equity has been reached, and we can all just get along, shake hands, and move out. But for those of us who are living in black, brown, LGBTQIA+ bodies, for those of us who have been system impacted, for those of us who are family members of the system impacted, we understand that the civil rights era of yesteryear is the civil rights era of today. That the cornerstones of progress have always taken place in our nation's classrooms. When black people, ADOS, the African descendants of slaves, got to this country as slaves in shackles, one of the first things that was decided that we would not be able to do was learn to read and write. And that was intentional. Up to and including punishment of death, we were prevented from being educated. And even though the overwhelming majority of our ancestors were born into this country and should have been considered full American citizens, the right to vote was not given to them. And even after much fighting, many years of not being allowed to, one of the impediments was that we had literacy tests. The very thing that we were not allowed to learn to do was now the thing that stopped us from being able to participate in the democracy that we were born into. Education has always sat at the cornerstone of discrimination in this country. The more educated you are, to Tangi's point, the more you can see the perils in front of you, the more you understand the world around you, and there's a concerted effort to remove that. America right now stands at a literacy rate that is, quite frankly, below the majority of the industrialized world. And this is not new, and this is not a pandemic era occurrence. We have been this way for quite some time. It is easier for people to admit that they can't do math, or math is hard for them. And by people, I include myself. I use a tip and split calculator. Than it is for folks to admit that they have trouble reading, or that they read on the 2nd or 3rd grade level. But factually, over 65% of the American population reads on the 4th grade level. That is irrespective of race. So there's something else that is going on here, and something that we should all be alarmed about and engaged in. Actively making sure that literacy is not only a talking point, but it's something we are working to achieve. Because if we are not literate, we do not understand the world around us. More importantly, we don't understand the world we are in. For black and brown people, for people who are in the marginalized intersection, black women, Latino women, the justice impacted community, which is overwhelmingly black and brown. Individuals who have been underserved in this country for quite some time, and if certain people get their way, will be underserved till the end of time. The calling upon us is to continue to fight, to continue to engage, to continue to mobilize, to make sure that states hear us, to make sure that we are in front of the people that matter, but to also make sure that you understand your power. Because there is no elected official that is more powerful than each and every person in this room, online as well. And I say that because how did they get to those positions? We are a democracy if we can keep it, but as long as we have it, they get to those positions because we elected them. And whether you choose to participate or not, you're making a political decision. We want to make sure that when we're arguing against book bans, when we're wanting to have our curriculum reflective of the vast diversity of this country and the vast diversity of our classrooms, that we're remembering that these elections don't happen just every 4 years. Your state and local elections happen during midterm cycles, off-year elections. Some of y'all have elections almost every other year. I think the Georgia person left, but Georgia's got elections all the dang time. Be engaged, know who's running, know what's on the ballot, know what ballot initiatives, referendums matter for you and your community, but also understand that you need to be here and you need to engage. And with that, we have an amazing special guest, and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts 7th District. She's an activist, she's a legislator, She's the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm a South Side of Chicago person, so I'm also going to call you a daughter of Chicago because she graduated school in Chicago. And she's a sponsor of the Book Save Lives Act. Yes. Welcome, Congresswoman Preston.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for your patience. The legislative schedule was not cooperating today. Actually, not just today, this entire 118th Congress. But it was very much a Nettie Seeley dynamic for me. Nothing but death could keep me from it. I had to get here to y'all. So thank you once again for your patience. And thank you, Denise Forte, for stewarding the Education Trust's commitment to this work, and to each of our special guests whose dedication to education justice continues to change and save lives. I am deeply honored to be with you tonight, on this day, at this moment, as these are deeply consequential times. Unprecedented has been the characterization for the last 3 years, and yet for Black folks, these unprecedented times feel all too familiar. Admittedly, it is tempting to surrender to a detached resignation of the many injustices, but that is not true to who we have been called to be, nor has it ever been. Right now, nor has it ever been. Besides, we've built the resistance muscle. We had no other choice, as we have always had to litigate, legislate, agitate, and mobilize for those things that are a birthright for others. History has proven to us time and again that gains are not guaranteed. Wherever and whenever there has been progress for Black folks and other marginalized people, progress has threatened institutions of white supremacy. Our progress has often been met with violence, race massacres, targeted policy violence, or even the murder of our leaders. Coretta Scott King once said that freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. Which is why, despite the draconian landscape of attacks on Black leadership and leaders, the rise in anti-Black policies, the defunding of DEI, the gutting of voting rights and affirmative action in higher ed, and yes, even bans on our bodies and our books, I remain encouraged. As I've come to accept my lot in life as a justice seeker and movement builder, the path to justice is not a linear one. It is a jagged algorithm. And so here we are once again in the algorithm, with bans on books that tell our stories, reflect our lived experiences, highlight our brilliance, and illuminate our traumas. An assault on our authors, intellectual and creative freedoms, an erasure of our history, and at times even perverting history. I work alongside people who have asserted that the enslavement of my ancestors was ostensibly a workforce development program, and an attempt to silence and marginalize our joys, an assault on our authors' intellectual and creative freedoms, an erasure of history, and an attempt to silence and to marginalize our joys. This past school year alone had more than 3,000 instances of books banned across 33 states. Now, no states are safe from these attacks, red or blue. We have unrelenting and coordinated attacks from school boards to state legislatures, all the way to the Supreme Court, who I think have been enlisted as co-conspirators and accomplices, even if that means overturning the will of the majority of the people. So again, none of us are exempt from these attacks. In fact, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, often regarded as a progressive blue state, and a liberal leader in education equity, even in Massachusetts, libraries saw challenges to books quadruple last year. That is why in Congress I introduced the Books Save Lives Act, legislation that would ensure libraries offer diverse books and treat discriminatory bans as violations of federal civil rights laws. Creating a future where every person can prosper means creating schools where every student can learn. Denying access to representative literature is discrimination. And it is not only discrimination, it is dangerous. Dangerous to the mental development of our students, to their mental health, emotional health, and to their physical safety. Last year, police were called to the W.E.B. Du Bois Regional Du Bois Middle School in Massachusetts to prevent students from reading a banned book. The police were called. That is what this moment has come to. Police called to schools to stop students from reading. Again, unprecedented, yet all too familiar. That is what this moment has come to. Police called to schools to stop students from reading. Shameful. Students should not have to fear police response in their learning environments. For too long, the presence of police in schools has resulted in our students, particularly students of color, queer students, and students with disabilities, being criminalized for normal adolescent behavior simply for how we show up. Instead of receiving the resources and support they deserve, these students are put on a pathway to confinement. Since my first term in Congress, I've introduced the Counseling, Not Criminalization in Schools Act and the Ending Pushout Act. These bills were designed in partnership with student advocates because I believe that those closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policymaking. And because there will be no erasure of Black scholars, I want to lift up formerly Dr. Monique Morris, now Kubson, who was my partner. Obviously, you know, the author of the bestseller, The Pushout, right? So she was my co-author in my sort of cooperative governing effort here, where we enlisted students from private, public, parochial schools, and we paid them a stipend. Because they're experts. And so we had evidence-based focus groups with 100 students across all those different learning communities to gather our research. And again, we stipended them for their intellectual contribution. So let's clap on that. So shout out to one of my favorite doctors, Dr. Monique there. These bills were designed in partnership with student advocates, again, because I believe those closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. We already know what it is to live in the present and the residual aftermath of legislated hurt and harm. I maintain that policy is my love language, because I believe if hurt and harm can be legislated, so too can equity, healing, and justice. The Counseling, Not Criminalization in Schools Act, the Ending Pushout Act, this legislation would invest in safe and nurturing school climates that support all students while ending over-policing and discriminatory disciplinary policies in our public schools. Daily, our students are carrying so much across the threshold of our learning communities in their emotional backpacks. Their problems are multifaceted and intersectional. They require responsive, trauma-informed, culturally congruent policies, and we have a responsibility to deliver exactly that. That is why it is important that you are all here tonight. The Can't Be Erased campaign is using the most powerful tool we have to compel action, our stories. So I'll share my own, because this work is deeply personal to me. As a child who was in the throes of a near decade of intra-family sexual abuse, I was leading a very compartmentalized existence. I was competitive debater and president of my class, and however, I was also a frequent flyer in the school nurse's office. Not because there was anything physically wrong with me, but because it was a space that I felt safe in. One of the reasons why I championed the need for trauma-informed schools is because that school nurse was trained, because I was one of those kids, I didn't act out, I shut down. So you had to really lean in and pay attention and be trained. When a learning environment is trauma-informed, as you well know, instead of someone asking what's wrong with you, they will ask what happened to you. And she did. So again, I didn't want to be in class. I didn't know how to express myself. I didn't know what to do. I felt tremendous shame, and I felt very alone in the world. And then I read Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Cage of a Bird Sings. And it was the first time I knew I was not alone. So when I say that books save lives, I know this to be true because that book saved mine. Now that book is one of the most banned books in our country. I don't know where I would be if that book was not available to me when I needed it the most. Again, when I say that books save lives, I know it to be true, and I'm sure the same is true for many of you here. Your willingness to be here to stand in the gap and challenge the broken status quo is powerful. Your voices, your stories, your lives are powerful. Know that I stand with you in our fight for inclusive, safe schools for every student. In the same way that I occupy a congressional seat that was once held by John F. Kennedy and Tip O'Neill, and I'm the first person of color, first black woman to represent the Commonwealth in the House of Representatives in its 230-year history. I don't, so far as being my ancestors' wildest dreams, I'm their dreams on steroids because no one ever could have predicted that that seat would be held today by a bald, unapologetic black woman. And so all I want for our young people is to be able to show up in the world fully, authentically, and unapologetically as themselves, without fear and without discrimination. I'll close here again as I commend you all for your commitment, and thank you for your patience today with my arrival. And I'll just share with you sort of a prayer that I've been carrying and I can't let go of. I went to Minnesota to organize with indigenous community to stop a pipeline. And it was my first time being on a reservation. And when I entered, an elder told me, and I believe this very much, that there were 3 ancestors walking with me. And as I was leaving, that same elder said to me in sort of a way to pass it on, now when you leave here, make sure you are a better ancestor than descendant. May we all carry that prayer and that call to action with us every day to be better ancestors than descendants and to deliver a love letter to future generations. Thank you. Thank you all.
And that will conclude our program. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you everyone virtually for watching. And again, please visit edtrust.org/takeaction to learn more and to get your next steps in advocacy rolling. Thanks so much.